Welcome back to season 3 of the Go to Masters podcast, where we converse with GTM leaders from some of the most fastest growing businesses out there and bring you what they've learned through their experience. Joining us today is Nabeel Ebeid, VP of Revenue Operations, Wunderkind. Thank you for being here today, Nabeel. Could you please share a little bit about yourself to our listeners?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I am VP of Go-to-Market Operations for Wonderkind, which I've had a career combining finance and operations. I've run go-to-market operations for ActiveCampaign in the past, for Cheetah Digital, also for Monetate. Actually, Cheetah Digital and Monetate have both gone through some M&A since. I've also run FP&A organizations. I've also done a decent amount of M&A. I've been at acquisitive companies, and I've notably at Cheetah. That was a spinoff of Experience marketing software assets. I did a lot of work on the stand up, helped build the finance teams, the operations team, and I bought and sold a few parts of it before running that exit, which is a merger with the Campaign Monitor Group to become Marigold. I've had a career combining sort of finance and operations in mid-stage software companies, call it, since 2010 when I started at ExactTarget, which ended up IPOing and then getting acquired by Salesforce.
It's pretty diverse background. You have such an interesting journey from deep finance roles into strategy and now GTM operations, revenue operations. Was that transition intentional or something that evolved naturally? And what's one finance skill that you still gives you an edge in RevOps today?
Yeah, so everywhere I've gone, I have I'm very comfortable modeling. I have a strong finance background. My first years out of college, actually, I worked in financial evaluations and risk management and did some heavy finance. So I'm very comfortable in a spreadsheet. I've always felt that I like being in the spreadsheet, but I also like understanding what's driving what goes into the spreadsheet. And I think it's that curiosity that led me to operations. So there have been times when, I've overseen both, but um, when I'm in the spreadsheets, I want to know what's happening in the business. When I'm in the business, I want to, make sure that that is driving the right KPIs to accomplish our financial goals. So I've always straddled both worlds. I actually started my software career at ExactTarget. I was reporting to the VP of Services and Support at ExactTarget, and I was maybe what we would now call embedded finance, but everything that he was looking to do, he would sort of run by my spreadsheets. We would talk about it. We would, run some numbers, identify some problems in the business, and let that drive strategy. So that's kind of always been the role I've played. In 2016, I think, was when I started in sales operations at Monetate. I hadn't worked in sales operations before. We spent a lot of time building some trust with our salespeople because, coming from finance, that's typically one of the bigger barriers to working with commercial teams. I've always found that my finance skill set, my ability to distill day-to-day operations into material levers of what the company is trying to accomplish is a very important skill set, actually, both in finance and in operations.
It's great to hear how you combined data and people together, including stakeholder management, and how you kind of shaped your career. You hit some meaningful milestones along the way. When you think back, what's one turning point that truly changed the way you lead or make decisions? Something that still influences how you operate today.
Yeah, I had an interesting first exposure to management. So I had been on project teams before where I wielded some informal authority, but my first management experience, true management experience, was at Cheetah Digital when I ran our Brazil office, it was a tiny office. It was fewer than 10 people. Um, and nobody had any idea from corporate what Brazil did. In fact, there were, questions of tax compliance and HR compliance. It was just sort of a forgotten office. And when the general manager of that office left kind of abruptly, I ended up stepping in not only to manage the team, but also to figure out what to do with the office, which ultimately we ended up shutting down the office. And I actually tried to sell that business for $1. And So it was, I would say, I was fortunate to have a sandbox where I could make a lot of mistakes because this was not a business that was critical to the core, our core lines of business. It was small, it was declining. I'm eternally grateful for the team there and for their patience with me as I sort of learned on the job. But here I was managing from New York, a team that was based in Sao Paulo remotely. In some cases, there were language barriers. There were a lot of issues to solve. I don't know how much you know about operating in Brazil, but there are complexities there, tax policy, HR policy. So there's there a lot of challenges, but I think that team was very patient with me there. I learned in the process to do my best to understand as best as possible, not only the business situation, but how people are experiencing that business situation. And spend my first month in any leadership job trying to listen more than I speak. That was obviously a case where I was well aware that there were a lot of business contexts that I didn't understand, but I think that really taught me to build the kinds of relationships, not just formal reporting relationships, but the kinds of relationships where, people on the ground doing the work trust you to, you know, tell you when they have challenges that you can be helpful in resolving or that can inform your understanding of the business.
It sounds like you rose up to the occasion, and at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? Uh,
I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure everybody on the team would agree, but I did my best, and they were very patient with me. So, and ultimately, I think shutting down that business in an orderly fashion ended up being, what made sense both for the business and for the people who all found graceful ways to move on.
Absolutely. I have a question on AI as well. AI is transforming GTM and RevOps faster than ever, of course. From where you sit, what's the most meaningful shift AI is actually creating right now? Not the bus, but the change that leaders should genuinely be preparing for.
Yeah. Um, So when I think about my role in operations, there's a bunch of my role that is, reporting, analysis, territory management, forecasting, comp, all of those things that are pretty quantitative. And I haven't seen um, AI yet provide a ton of value there, although I think that there are, some things certainly that we're experimenting with. My team right now is launching a project to understand better how feeding a bunch of big data on our touch points with our prospects could lead to some account scoring, contact scoring that is kind of more sophisticated than what I've done previously in my career. So there's some potential there, but where I have seen the most potential so far is in things like sales enablement, where we've managed to operate pretty lean and distill a lot of content pretty quickly and easily, accelerating the ability of salespeople to wrap their minds around new products, new offerings, accelerating time to productivity for new sales hires. So the accessibility of information has been vastly improved by AI. That of course requires some, good traditional best practices like a good content management organization, keeping content up to date. If your underlying content um, isn't usable for humans, it's not going to be very usable for machines. But sales enablement has been a big area where we've been able to find some efficiencies. And then on a lot of repetitive things, like when it comes to our BDAs who are finding us opportunities and booking us meetings, I think that there's just a bifurcation between kind of high touch and low touch. And there are a lot of repetitive tasks on the low touch front that can be made more efficient, be automated. I'm a little like I have a particular point of view here. I think as a buyer of software and somebody who, gets prospecting emails all the time, I found some of these like personalization hacks to be kind of creepy, honestly. Like, I see you went to this high school. I wonder what that experience was like. And by the way, do you want to book a 15-minute call with me? So there's like superficial ways to use AI, but I do think that when it comes to prospecting is still very much a numbers game. And low touch prospecting, I think, can be made a lot more efficient using, some a, a number of tools on the market. Um, Researching accounts before calls can be made a lot more efficient. We have access to a lot more research more efficiently than we did before. So if you have 10 calls to make today and, there's some pretty big calls with some, you know, some stakeholders you want to seem knowledgeable to, it's never been easier to, get summaries of everything the internet knows about the company or their business case. A lot of things that I used to think about farming out to Upwork when it comes to, account enrichment, contact enrichment, data collection, whatever. Yes, there are tools for that on the market, but if there are specific things that a company needs to be able to prospect that aren't necessarily available off the shelf, those are things that I used to think about farming out to Upwork. And now, the first question is, what does AI know about them? So all this is to say, I think like with processes and with another thing that's actually been useful for us is data entry from contracts, from agreements, anytime when there's a road process, especially a process that involves, you know, summarizing, distilling information from, big amounts of text, there are a lot of efficiencies to be found in AI. I have a lot of hope that AI is going to, you know, improve and automate other processes as well, but we haven't seen those yet. And I will say, when it comes to data integration, how data speaks with each other, a lot of times data architecture is kind of a prerequisite for good processes, good operations to begin with. And once you have the data architecture in place, you're most of the way there. How much more efficiency you get from AI will depend on kind of the use case.
And that's a fair and honest take on AI. Now is the time companies are planning for 2026. As companies begin, we're recording this in November, of course, and as now companies begin planning their sales compensation for 2026, what does a smart behavior driving model look like to you? And on the flip side, what are the common pitfalls that tend to backfire?
Yeah. I will say the biggest and most common pitfall with sales compensation is actually wishful thinking. Uh, people believe that by typing a bigger number into their spreadsheet, more bookings will happen. And there's a difference between quota and capacity. Quota is ultimately that's a compensation question. That's a question of, it's going to impact payouts, it's going to impact morale, and you have to find the right balance when it comes to quota. And you have to be sensitive to, are you negotiating with your salespeople and your prospects from a position of strength or weakness? Do you have um, the product pipeline to justify what you're asking salespeople to go out to market with? And how much risk are you prepared to assume yourself versus transfer onto the salesperson to retain the right salespeople on your team? So I think it's important to understand what your salespeople, your BDAs, whoever, what they've been able to achieve in the past, and not be bound by that, to understand if you're going to propose any changes in your expectations, have some sort of plan for how those expectations are going to be realized. So there's, number one, a pitfall around just having realistic expectations and understanding that improving requires an actual operating plan for improvement. Two, I would say you want to simplify as much as possible and minimize the opportunities for to have to adjudicate things. Like, you want to have things be verifiable. You want to have the right process to measure the sorts of things that you're trying to put forth, and you don't want to have much ambiguity. A lot of salespeople are sort of hardwired to extract the most out of every situation. And that's not all salespeople. And that's certainly behavior that, in certain contexts, when they're negotiating with prospects, you want them to be able to identify every opportunity to maximize the benefits of the company. But you don't want them to do that with you, and you don't want to leave them with too many opportunities to do that. So I would say, if you're going to comp on non-traditional metrics, make sure that you understand exactly how those metrics are measured, and also try to distill the business outcomes that you're trying to realize into as few metrics as possible. So here's where I think materiality makes a big difference. So sometimes I'll see, we're doing, 30% on bookings, 30% on retention, 30% on, customer satisfaction, and then another 10% for, MBOs to be determined by the leadership. Well, you kind of have to put yourself in the position of the rep and understand, you know, how impactful is that 10%? Is that going to be meaningful? And also, how much dilution do you have in these goals if, and would it be possible to distill those three into two metrics? So I really go for the simplest thing that is going to impact the business outcomes that we're looking for. And the litmus test for me ultimately is, if we paid a lot of money, will it be for something good that has happened? A good comp plan is a plan where if you end up exceeding your budget, you're happy.
Solid take. At the end of the day, right incentives drive the right behavior of sales teams. With all the lessons you've gathered across your RevOps journey, if a company were building their RevOps function today, where should they put their first bit of focus? What early best practice helps teams avoid the biggest blind spots?
I've been doing a decent amount of rebuilding this year on our team. I will say when I think about RevOps, there are a number of capabilities that I want to make sure I have on the team. They may all be in one person, they may be in different people, but it is important to me that, especially this day and age, for a RevOps team to be technical and have some technical capabilities. By that, I mean understand your CRM well, understand how your CRM talks to other systems, understand how to architect and get your CRM to do what you need it to do from a process standpoint. I know that not every RevOps team has the luxury of having its systems teams sit within the team. Mine does. We have a wonderful global enterprise applications and processes team that administers our systems and configures them to give us what we need. It is important to have at least some technical ability on your team, I think. Um, and that also extends to, understanding what tools are out there, understanding, the difference between different, data enrichment providers, and how to leverage AI in processes that lend themselves well to that. So technical capabilities and understanding of tools is important. It is important to have good modeling skills on the team. I still think very much in numbers and spreadsheets, and so that's important for reporting, for planning, for territory management, for compensation, for a lot of our bread and butter. It's also very important to have the right relationships with commercial teams. If you have people on the team who have sold before, that's great. If but it's important to have people who have those relationships, not just with sales leadership, but with salespeople. In 2016, when I first started in sales ops, a lot of how I got to understand salespeople and build trust and build relationships is just I worked remotely at the time. The company was in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. I was in Chicago. And when I flew into town, I would play ping pong with them. I would, just hear how their jobs were going and the good, the bad, the ugly. I think if you can establish the kind of relationship where they respect you enough to understand that you are setting the right rules and guidelines, but also that you want them to be successful and you want to support them in ultimately selling the most, which is win-win, and that you understand that you care about and understand the barriers that are making it harder for them to sell, I think is very important. So if you don't have, former salespeople on the team, at least people who are very good at empathizing with salespeople and who have that curiosity and want to build those relationships. And I think it's also very important to have somebody on the team, perhaps the leader, who cares about process, because ultimately getting commercial people to do things that they don't want to do requires like keep the CRM clean. Part of that is building the right relationships. Part of that is also building processes that work, that make sense, that offer people enough incentive and sort of enough reason to do some of the more boring parts of their job, recognizing that their managers will follow up, you'll follow up, and that is, that there's a reporting cadence there, so that what they're inputting is going to be relevant. So understanding kind of process and how the human element of process, how people navigate process, I think is a very important component. So, sort of RevOps is a I would say is a multidisciplinary profession. Having all those ingredients in a RevOps team, I would say, is important to me as I think about designing a team.
It's wearing a lot of hats together. Well, that brings us to the end of this insightful episode of Go to Masters. Big thanks to Nabeel for sharing his experiences and valuable insights. Remember, you can tune in every week to learn more from game changers driving hypergrowth companies across the globe. Go to Masters is brought to you by Everstage, your trusted partner for transforming the way businesses handle sales commissions. I'm your host, signing off.